Okay, so chapter 3 is called Water and Life. That's the title of it. And I was all proud of myself because I found this slide in the PowerPoint design section that looked like water on a leaf. This is probably the most important slide of the day. Okay, so these are water molecules that we talked about yesterday as having polar covalent bonds. And if you remember, we had oxygen with its 8 protons, 8 neutrons, 8 electrons, and 2 electrons in that outer shell. So it's going to share with 2 hydrogen atoms, which only have 1 proton and 1 electron. Now, see these little symbols here with the plus, that means a slight positive charge and a slight negative charge. And remember, that's the polarity of a water molecule, that the oxygen side of the water molecule has a slight negative charge, really in these 2 areas, and the hydrogen side of a water molecule has these slight positive charges. That enables water to form hydrogen bonds. Notice the 3 dots, right? That enables water to form hydrogen bonds with another water molecule. Each water molecule can form 4 hydrogen bonds, right? So this is just showing you 5 water molecules, but each of these water molecules out here can then form 3 more hydrogen bonds. This forms a huge network of hydrogen bonds. And remember what I told you yesterday, an individual hydrogen bond is very short-lived, and meaning it's present and then it dissociates, it's present, then it dissociates within milliseconds. But together, when you have hundreds of them, they form a very strong surface, a very strong solution. These hydrogen bonds, which are the result of water being polar covalently, individual water molecules being polar covalently bonded together, these hydrogen bonds give water 4 special properties that no other liquid has on planet Earth. That's why the chapter is called Water and Life, because we're talking about life on Earth and the importance of water for life on Earth. So again, individual water molecules, polar covalently bound, made up of polar covalent bonds, however you want to say it, and each water molecule can form 4 hydrogen bonds. Those are the reasons that water has these 4 special properties. So now we're just going to go through the special properties, and I'm going to tell you a little bit of the detail, but not all of it, because this isn't chemistry, right? If you take a chemistry class, you may spend 2 chapters on water, okay? You need to know the basics about how the special properties of water help us to have life on Earth. So the first special property of water is what we refer to as cohesion. And that is water molecules sticking to other water molecules, meaning forming hydrogen bonds with other water molecules. And cohesion, because water is polar covalent, water can also stick to other charged surfaces. So in this picture, what we are looking at is we are looking at a tree, and we're looking at how water is transported from the roots of the tree all the way up to the leaves. And one of the mechanisms of how this can possibly happen is because of cohesion of water to water and adhesion of water to other charged surfaces. So, a few things you need to know. If I were to have a person standing here next to this tree, they'd only be about this tall, right? So this tree has maybe 20 or 30 feet above the ground, and it has almost an equal amount of a root system underground. The water that trees use or plants use for photosynthesis always comes from their roots. It does not come from rain landing on the leaves. Just like you, leaves are basically waterproof. A little bit of water can get in, but that's not the main source. So an individual water molecule needs to travel from the root all the way up to the leaf, which could in essence be 50 or 60 feet. And the mechanism for this to be accomplished, these are the cells here that form what you may know if you know a little bit about plants. These are called xylem. Those are the vessels that transport water, right? And the phloem, so you see there's small ones and larger ones, and the phloem is of course what transports the products of photosynthesis back down to the rest of the tree. Look at the scale here. This is 300 micrometers. So this is an electron micrograph. This is tiny, tiny, tiny little straws. You can think of them like that, little tiny straws. And the water molecules inside of there are going to be sticking to the edges of those little vessels, those little tubes, because of adhesion, because water's polar covalent, so it can stick to other things that have a charge. In this case, it looks like a positive charge. That they're adhering to the inside of the wall here, and the water is sticking to itself. So when one of these water molecules is used by a chloroplast in the leaf, that is going to tug on every single water molecule in this tube and continue the transport of water molecule by molecule all the way up to the top of the tree. Okay, so this is important for, this is an example of cohesion, right? Water sticking to water. A second example of cohesion is this picture of the spider here. It's actually called a water strider, because notice how it is sitting on top of the water, and that is because of the surface tension of the water, which is also a result of cohesion. Now, second property of water, special property of water, is what we call moderation of temperature, and the only picture we have for that is moderation of climate. But I think on the note handout, I mentioned about specific heat of water and heat of vaporization. So we can take a slight pause here. I'm going to do a new share and do the whiteboard. So specific heat, that's a term that you need to know, because that is how we measure. Specific heat is the amount of energy required. And energy, if those of you, again, that have had chemistry, you'll know that's measured in kilocalories. The amount of energy required to raise the temperature of a substance. Actually, it's 1 gram of a substance by 1 degree Celsius. Okay, why do we care? Why is this important? Because water has the highest specific heat of all liquids, which is actually 1.00 something. And I think it's measured in, I think it goes kilocalories per gram per degree Celsius, like that. Every other substance on the planet has a lower specific heat. What does that mean? Well, what it means in terms for us is that water can absorb a high amount of heat or energy before it changes temperature. This is important for life on Earth, for climate, and for organisms that need to maintain homeostasis and moderate their temperature inside their bodies. Okay? Any other substance, think of like an extreme example would be a metal pan that you would put on the stove, right? That heats up really quickly. It's really hot when you touch it. The water inside the pan takes a long time to boil. That's what we're talking about, specific heat. Water has a high specific heat. And because of that high specific heat, as I mentioned, that's going to help moderate the climate. So I'm going to get rid of this. Stop sharing this one. It's going to moderate the climate. Oh, I didn't mean to do that, sorry. Just what this picture is about. Right. The authors are showing you California because they're from California, right? We live close to the shore, close to the ocean as well. So you guys have probably a pretty good understanding of this also. What they're showing you here is that the Pacific Ocean is a huge body of water that can absorb heat from the land. And what they're showing you is closest to the ocean, closest to the shore where the land meets the ocean, that's where the temperature is moderated the most, right? Or closest to the temperature of the actual water. The further you get away from the ocean, the higher the temperature goes, right? This is the area where it's going to be comfortable to live, comfortable to grow crops, have agriculture. And it's the same for us, right? We live about maybe 45, 50 miles from the beach. And you guys know that the first warm day, right, when it gets to be 80 degrees, you're like, oh, I'm going to go to the beach. You jump in your car and get to the shore, and it's windy and cold, right? And you're like, why is it so cold here? Because the water hasn't heated up yet. It hasn't had a chance to absorb heat from the land because the land is just starting to warm up for summer. When you go to the shore in, say, September, October, it's perfectly beautiful and warm because now the water is releasing that heat back onto the land to keep the shore a more moderate temperature. Okay. Now, like I said, I don't have a slide for the second portion of this for moderating heat of vaporization or like perspiration, right? But these properties, this high specific heat is important for us also to be able to cool off when we sweat. Third special property of water is diagrammed here in this picture, is that water is unique in that when it forms a solid, that solid is less dense than the liquid. So most other substances, when they change states from liquid to solid, they become more dense or more mass per area of volume. Water is not like that. Water expands its hydrogen bonds. And I like to include this picture because you can see how close the hydrogen bonds are here in this picture when it's liquid water. And then see how much space there is in these wide open air pockets that get trapped in the water as it freezes. This is what makes water less dense so that it floats, the ice floats over the water. So we can see this little crayfish or shrimp here living happily under the ice. And of course, this is important for life on Earth since all the fish and all of the plankton and all of these invertebrates do not die when there's ice on top of the water. They can still survive in the liquid water just fine and wait for the ice to melt. This is a new picture that was in the textbook, and I thought it was a nice picture to include to remind us about sea ice and the extent of sea ice. If you look here in the pale diagram, it shows the sea ice from 1979, the edges, the boundaries of the sea ice, and the extent of sea ice. And notice this data is old already. It's from 2014. So we're not even looking at how much less there is between 2014 and 2020. And I think it's important for us in biology to understand that that is going to have a negative impact on some organisms and species, right? It's going to put pressure on them to adapt or change, or the variations that can live with less ice are going to be more successful. And there are also some organisms that are going to benefit from this loss of sea ice. They may not be organisms that were in as large population before, but now because there's more space or more food available for them, they're able to flourish. So there is both benefit and harm when the environment changes, right? And it's going to put pressure on these species to adapt, and also on these species to adapt. Okay, what are we up to? This is the fourth special property of water. It is almost a universal solvent. So we can see salt here that we made yesterday in chapter 2. And when we put salt in water, and this is something that you guys know from being at home and cooking or just general life experience, that when you add salt to water, it dissolves, right? This is how it dissolves. Notice the polar negatively charged oxygen portions are surrounding the sodium. So they're basically going up to each one of these sodiums and saying, hey, instead of being attracted to big chlorine, negative chlorine, you could be attracted to us, and we will circle around you and bind to you and pull you away from the chlorine. And notice the chlorine molecules, all of the hydrogens or the positive portions, the positive polar side of water are surrounding the chlorine. As long as there is enough water, this salt will completely dissolve. Again, those of you that have had chemistry, you know that for each solid there is a solubility constant, and there's a requirement of how much water you have to put that into in order for it to dissolve. Water also can break covalent bonds. This looks like a protein to me. In your textbook, proteins are always purple. But it's going to take longer, and it will probably require more water. But you can see the water molecules are forming hydrogen bonds with the different portions of this particular protein, and they may be able to eventually pull some of these components of this protein apart. Okay, related to this, but not considered one of the special features of water, is the pH scale, acids and bases, and buffers. Those we need to discuss as well. So water, pure water, dissociates. So if you had a giant container of water that was pure water, water molecules will form this compound here. It's called the hydronium ion. Notice it's 3 hydrogens to that oxygen and a hydroxide ion. In pure water, these are in equal concentrations, meaning the hydronium and the hydroxide are in equal concentrations with normal H2O. That is neutral pH. That is pH 7 on the pH scale. Those of you that have heard of this before, right? Compounds that add extra hydrogens to the solution, extra hydrogen protons to the solution so that more hydroniums can be made. Those are known as acids. We call them proton donors to the solution. There's a picture of that. So these red plus charges are being dumped into the solution. Neutral solution, of course, we have equal amounts. This writing H plus or this proton, that's a shorthand of writing this, okay? Because we're just focusing on the extra positive charge here. A basic solution has fewer free protons. So we say basic solutions are hydrogen ion acceptors. Acidic solutions are acids are hydrogen donors to the solution. Now, when we measure things on the pH scale, what we are actually measuring is how much positive charge there is in this solution. When you stick those electrodes or the pH paper into the solution, it's measuring how positive is this solution, how much hydrogen ion or protons are extra in this solution. The more protons, the more pH is actually, the pH is lower, right? So neutral is 7, pH 1 is very acidic, pH 2 slightly less, pH 3 slightly less. This scale, because we're actually measuring individual protons, and in a solution of say 100 milliliters of a particular lemon juice or coffee, for example, there would be millions of protons and maybe even billions. And so to measure those, we use a log scale because that's on the power of base 10. So every time you move a step on the pH scale, you're actually becoming, if you're moving from 6 to 5, you're becoming 10 times more acidic. If you're moving 6 to 4, you're becoming 100 times more acidic, because each one of these marks, it's not just a linear scale, it is a logarithmic scale. It's the power of 10. So every time you move a step, it's 10 times more acidic. And then if you move 2 steps, that would be 10 times 10 times, or 10 times 10, or 100 times more acidic. Same if you move toward the basic side of the scale. Every step on the scale is 10 times less acidic or 10 times more basic. Notice that most living things, we usually say in pretty much all the science classes, most living things are most comfortable between pH 6 to 8. Now, the last thing we need to discuss very briefly is you should know a definition for a buffer. A buffer is usually a weak acid and it's salt, and it's a solution that can absorb pH changes. So it has the chemical ability to change into different compounds so that it helps the organism stay close to neutral. And that is the end of what I was going to tell you